Hey there, welcome back to our kitchen. Today we are going to be talking about sourdough, a recipe, the process, the timeline, and a few tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. So hopefully this will help you and give you some more confidence to bring sourdough to your kitchen. So let's get started. For this recipe, we need 250 grams of leaven, which is just starter, sourdough starter. It's just more like a certain amount of starter you need for this recipe. So in order to get 250 grams, we need 125 grams of water, 125 grams of flour, unbleached all-purpose flour, and 25 grams of starter. You want to make your leaven in a quart-sized jar so it has enough room to grow. So this water is warm-ish. It doesn't have to be, but it's still a wild yeast, so if it's in the right temperature, it'll just grow a little bit faster. So put 125 grams of water in this jar, 125 grams of flour, and then lastly I will add 25 grams of starter. No, thank you, I'll do it. Okay. When you're first starting out, it's a good idea to feed a new starter, make a new starter into a new jar before making your leaven, just so you don't accidentally put the rest of this leftover into the discard jar, which I have done a few times, but I'm paying attention today, so I have enough starter in there. And I keep my starter in the fridge between uses, so I'm just gonna pop this back into the fridge. And it works good enough for me. So I would just mix this up good. And so another note, it's winter, or it's cold enough anyways outside. And in my house, it's about 68 degrees. So in the summer, when it's really warm in the house, like 75 to almost 80 degrees, it will sit on the counter and be ready much more quickly. But since it is colder in the house, it does not rise so fast. So I will put the oven light on and I will put this in the oven. Again, make sure not to bake it because I've also done that. So it's just after 9 o'clock. It's a little after, it's like 9:20. I normally like to make it around 9, and then when it's in the right temperature and warmer, it'll be ready to make the dough around 5 o'clock. If it's cold and you leave it on the counter, it can take a lot longer. So that's why I will put it in the oven. So I will just put the lid and I'll just set it on top of here. So on this quart jar, it is marked. And so on the one side, the line is 200 milliliter is about where it's at. So we want this to at least double, and we'll see this later, and I'll kind of share more about how you know when your leaven is ready. So I'll just pop this in my stove. See, the oven light is on. And look at it when it gets closer to 5. So it's 4:30, and when the leaven is in the oven with the light on, it sometimes goes a little faster. So it is ready to be used. Let's see. It was here this morning and now it is just over doubled. So we're going to use it. And I did actually almost bake it in the oven. I turned the oven on because we are having a roast chicken tonight and to preheat it, and I almost baked it, but I caught it right away, so it lucked out. So be careful if that's what you are gonna do, if you're gonna put it in the oven with the oven light on. Okay, so I've got some warmish water, my flour, again it's unbleached flour. I use Great Value unbleached all-purpose flour from Walmart, and it works great. So, and then we got the leaven here. So I am going to put 580 grams of water into the bowl. Okay. And now I'm going to put my leaven in. Let me see if I can't show you. You can see it's very nice and bubbly. Inside, stretching from the sides. So it is ready to go. I'm gonna just pour this in. And I'll show you in a second what it looks like for it to be floating. That was 250 grams of leaven. Here you can see how or what it means for it to be floating. There's just a little bit that's not floating very well, but it's just fine. So we are good to go. So I'm gonna take my dough whisk, or you have a fork or whatever you have, and I'm going to just whisk it gently and get it pretty mixed up so it's nice and milky before I add my flour. A note, you do want your starter or your leaven to float. If it doesn't float well, then it's probably not strong enough to leaven your bread. So when I first started, I had a starter that was not active enough. I tried making it from scratch and it resulted in a lot of very gummy loaves, and they were not enjoyable to eat. So make sure your starter is active and strong enough to leaven bread. Okay, now it's all nice and milky. Back on the scale, and you're gonna add 825 grams of flour. This recipe, it will make 2 loaves. So if you only want to make 1 loaf, then I guess you would want to half it. So now I'll just mix this up until all the flour is incorporated. So this is what it looks like after it's just mixed up. So we are going to leave this here. I'm going to put the lid on it, and it is going to sit for about 30 minutes to autolyze without salt. So it's been about 30 minutes, and now it is time to add the salt. So I put about 14 grams into this container, and I did put a little bit of water in it because it'll help incorporate into the dough better. I do use Redmond real salt. It's recommended not to use an iodized table salt. I did use it in a pinch before and it seemed to turn out fine, but I like Redmond, so that is what I use. And make sure to put a little water because otherwise it won't incorporate well. So I put it in, and you just want to, grab it and twist it and make sure it's really incorporated good into your dough. Now I set the lid on and let it sit for a little while. Here's what it looks like after it's sat. Now it is time to do the first round of stretch and folds. So here's how I originally started doing the stretch and folds when I first started doing sourdough, and I'll show you a different method for the next time. But you just take one side and fold it over the other, and you spin it, and you'll end up doing it 4 times, and that is considered one round of stretch and folds. So this is when the dough is bulk fermenting on the counter. The goal is to leave it on the counter for about 3 to 5 hours. If it's warmer in your house, you want to leave it closer to 3 hours, and if it's cooler, closer to 5 hours. During those 3 to 5 hours, you want to do about 3 to 4 rounds of stretch and folds. This helps the dough ferment more evenly. There is a little wiggle room with this time frame, but that should be about your goal. So you can see how it has already started to develop after just 2 rounds of stretch and folds. And now for the third stretch and fold, I'm going to show you a different way to do your stretch and folds. And I think it's become my preferred way of doing it, although both result in great loaves. So it's totally up to you, but that is by just picking up the dough in the center and plopping it to the side. So again, you'll do each side, so about 4 times, and that'll be considered one round. But in the end, you kind of end up with a smoother result. So that's just another way that you can do your stretch and folds if you want. By the time you reach your 4th stretch and fold, you'll see how much stronger your dough is and how much more it can stretch without tearing. So by this time, I will just finish doing the stretch and folds, put the lid on it, and pop it in the fridge to ferment overnight. Okay, so the dough was in the fridge overnight. Took it out this morning. It's been out a little over an hour. It's best to not let it sit more than an hour, because if it warms up too much, it can get kind of sticky and hard to work with. So here's what the dough looks like. It looks a little different than what it did from when we first started. So like I said, this recipe makes 2 loaves. So I'm going to make 1 round loaf and use, this is a 7-inch round proofing basket. And I'm also going to make 1 in just a regular loaf pan to show you guys different ways you can make them. I'm going to do a regular loaf and a cinnamon raisin loaf. So first I will just put it on the counter. scale, if you want to make very even loaves, I will usually, you know, kind of try to split them up and just weigh them a little bit to make sure they're, you know, pretty close to each other. They should both be around like 800 grams. So close enough. And this is a bench scraper. If you don't have one, they're very handy around the kitchen. And I wouldn't say they're necessary for sourdough, but they are very, very helpful. So I would recommend getting one. Okay. So now, this is the part you are going to laminate the dough. So basically just take the dough and make it into a square shape. You don't really want to use flour because the tension you get from it sticking to the counter is what helps it help you laminate it. If it's very sticky, if it's over fermented and it's very sticky, you can use a little flour. At this point, I use brown rice flour. It's gluten-free. And since the dough has already fermented and worked with the gluten, it's best to use a gluten-free flour. So again, it's brown rice flour is what I use and what I'll use to put on the top of the dough in a little bit. So, okay. So you can see how it sticks together. Well, there it tore a little bit, but for the most part, it's not tearing. Okay, so this is gonna be my regular loaf. So, and that's gonna go on around. So I'll go side, side. Okay. And when you don't have any inclusions in them, it's easiest just to use your countertop and build tension. When you put inclusions, like in the next loaf, it's helpful to use the bench scraper to build tension. This is really important when building tension when you're putting these loaves in a Dutch oven, because the only thing that the dough will have to rise and shape a nice loaf is the tension and structure it has, because there are no sides, unlike when you bake in one of these pans. So it's important that you build good tension. So I will set this one here and it'll bench rest for about 10 minutes. And so that I will just do this cinnamon raisin loaf now. So inclusions are a little trickier and might take a little practice getting them how you want. You can put different things in your bread. Some things that'll affect it is like the moisture content of whatever you're putting in there. So some things I've done are jalapeno peppers and cheddar cheese. And that worked out good. And also I've done Lindor chocolates for a Christmas thing, and those are really good to add in. So you can do a lot of different things, but you got to be mindful of the moisture content and how it'll affect with your dough. But I just put some cinnamon on there. I think it's helpful when you are laminating it and you're putting in inclusions to leave the dough a little thicker to help prevent them poking through
and leaking out. So now I'll fold one side, and if you're going to be using a, let's see, a long retard proofing basket, the oval shaped, this is how you would shape it for one of these, and that's how I'll shape it for this loaf pan. So you get, you know, the longer shape is to go one side in a little farther than the other. And for the inclusions, I'll also put a little bit on each fold. Be careful not to get too close to the edges, as some will come out. It's pretty common for me for some to leak out, so if it does, it's not the end of the world, but sometimes I do try to prevent it a little bit. Yeah, more raisins. And then we'll fold the other side. So this side is wider than this. And again, if your dough is a little sticky and you want to put a little flour on your hands, you can do that. I know a lot of times when my dough is sticky, it's because I let it sit on the counter too long, so it's getting over fermented. And it's best to avoid that. Or the dough works better if you can avoid that. And your loaf will turn out better if you avoid that. But I think you probably have had enough of those, don't you think? So now I will roll it up. See, I'm losing some. And when you're building tension with inclusions, you want to be careful not to build so much tension and keep moving it to where the inclusions start popping out. So you do want to be very careful of that. This is where the bench scraper is handy, especially on long loaves, but especially when you have inclusions. Get this out of the way. So just go each side and tuck them in. Okay. And then we'll let that one also rest for 10 minutes. Some people will laminate or do it again. I usually just do this a little bit more. And I will flour the proofing basket just a little bit so it doesn't stick. And then when you use the proofing baskets, the dough goes seam side up because you will flip it over into a Dutch oven or whatever you're cooking it in. Whereas for a loaf pan, you will put it in how it is because you'll bake right from that. So when using loaf pans, I'll put a little bit of butter on the sides. You could use parchment paper. I would say, especially with the cinnamon raisin loaf, a lot of times some of it will leak out and it ends up creating kind of a hard syrup. So it would be much easier But, so that is a note about the cinnamon ones. A lot of times for me, it'll leak out. Maybe because I overfill it, I don't know. But it's important to try to get the loaf right out of the pan right away before that syrup gets hard and makes it very hard for you to get the loaf out. Just something from what I have dealt with. So, okay. So it's buttered. Just place it into the loaf pan. So it's much warmer in our dining room. So I brought the loaves out here to proof. So I'm just gonna put a towel over them and let them proof for about an hour or two. I'll show you how to know when they're ready to proof, but try to keep them kind of out of the sun so they don't dry out on the tops. But they will proof obviously in a warmer, proof faster in a warmer place. So we'll check back in a couple hours. So it's been a couple hours now. It is a little cooler in the house, so it's taking a little longer. But to check if the dough is ready and proofed, I will put a little flour on my finger, and so it's filled in some, but there's still an indent, and it is good enough to bake with. Okay, so the bread is proofed, or the dough is proofed, and so if you want bread right away, you can bake it now. A loaf, one of these in this loaf pan could be baked right now and would work just fine. As far as baking these in the proofing baskets, it works best if they're cold, especially when you're trying to score things. It works best to bake them cold. You can bake it right now, but I'm going to put it in the fridge. I'm gonna put both of them in the fridge just so I don't have to turn the oven on twice. But I'm gonna put it in the fridge. It'd be great if it's out in there 6 hours, but it's probably just gonna get a couple hours before I make it to go along with supper tonight. So I will put them in just plastic bags. So if you have like this shower covers or something like that, anything to put in there. I don't want the tops to get dry, but put them like this and then put them in the fridge until I am ready to bake with them. So the Dutch oven is in the oven. I'm preheating the oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and I will just have the Dutch oven preheat in there. If it can stay in there when it gets hot for like 15-20 minutes so that the Dutch oven is really hot before the bread goes in, that's best. And then when the Dutch oven is ready to go, I will take the dough out of the fridge and I will put it on parchment paper and score it. The dough that is in a proofing basket and will bake in the Dutch oven will go at 450 for 20 minutes. Thank you. And then I will take the lid off, turn the oven down to 425 and bake it another 15 to 17 minutes, depending on how dark you want it. The loaf pan, however, will bake at 425 for about 40 minutes, although you can check on how dark it is getting. Now that it has been chilling in the fridge for a while, I'm going to take it out of the bag and I am going to try to build up a little bit more tension by sewing the dough just like this, just so we can give as much tension as possible before putting it in the Dutch oven. It just so happened that when I was recording this video, I was making a pumpkin-shaped loaf,
So that is what the kitchen twine is for. For most loaves, you will not need this, but you will get to see how to make a pumpkin loaf if you ever want to. There are different ways that you can score a regular sourdough loaf. The main thing is that you have 1 or 2 deep cuts so that the bread can expand properly. Immediately after scoring, I will put the loaf into a preheated Dutch oven and put it into the oven right away. After 20 minutes, I will reduce the temperature to 425 and take the lid off of the Dutch oven. Then it will bake for another 15 to 17 minutes at 425. When baking in a loaf pan, I just put 1 main score down the center, and sometimes I add a few cuts to the side. But again, I bake this at 425 for about 40 to 45 minutes.
So that is how I make my sourdough bread. I hope it was helpful, and I hope it helps you start making sourdough in your own kitchen. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment box. If you like this video, make sure to like it so other people can see it. And as always, make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date. Until next time, thanks for watching.